So, welcome everyone to this episode of Stories for Healing. As those who've been here before know, this is a series that started a little over a week ago, and it was born out of a recognition that, there's so much division and stress and antipathy and just scared, angry feelings going around that as a storyteller, I figured we got to do something. And what does a storyteller do but tell stories? So, and what kind of stories do we tell? Well, we want to tell stories of not I'm right and you're wrong and I know the answer and you don't. We want to tell stories of healing and stories of reconciliation. And so that's what started. And what I thought would last a week is now well into its second and third, and soon it can be into its fourth week. And I've been very, very blessed by the number of storytellers who have said, I'd love to tell a story too. And so that's what we're doing. And storytellers are coming from around the world because you know what? This is a problem not just for you and me and our communities, it's for countries, it's for the world. So, um, so that's what we're doing. And today we're very fortunate to have a special guest. We have Sara Armstrong, who is going to be telling for us. So, Sara, please tell us a story.
Thanks, Jim. I love this project a lot, and I'm thank you so much for doing it and for inviting me to participate. Once there was an old couple that lived in a house on the top of a cliff overlooking the sea. Now, they hadn't always lived there. They had grown up in the village down on the seashore. They'd met each other down on the seashore, and they'd fallen in love and started a family. In fact, they had 3 strong young boys over time in their house down at the seashore. Well, the people in that village were fisher people, and that's how they made their living. That's how they got what they needed. And the boys, as they grew, learned to mend the nets and to row the boats and to do the fishing, and they became fisher people too. However, one by one, over time, they were lost to the sea, as were many of the young men from the village. So in their grief and in their loneliness, the old couple moved farther and farther away from the village and ended up in that house on the cliff overlooking the sea. Well, the way they made ends meet was that the old man would go into the forest nearby and gather twigs and branches, light wood for firewood, which he could sell down in the village. Well, one day, as he was coming back with his armload of sticks, he came around a bend in the path, and there in front of him was a stranger, a man in a long white robe with a long white beard. And the stranger said, "I'd like to help you." And as the old man came and approached him, the stranger reached out and said, "This is for you." And he had in his hand a sack, a small sack. And when the old man took it and looked inside, he saw it was full of gold coins, and he fainted right there on the path. Well, when he woke up, the stranger was gone, but that little sack of coins was still there. So he picked it up and he headed for home. And he thought all the way, oh, what we can do with this. My wife and I, we will be set for life. We can have everything we need. We'll never worry about food. But as he got closer and closer, he started having other thoughts. Well, I'm not sure how my wife will want to spend the money. She may have some ideas that just wouldn't be right. So I don't think I'll tell her right now. And as he approached the house, he realized that by the porch was a pile of manure that had been shoveled there. And he hid that sack underneath the pile of manure and he went into the house. Well, the next morning, he was having the most wonderful dream. It was a dream of the most delicious food. There was the smell of sausages and freshly baked bread. And when he opened his eyes, he realized it wasn't a dream. Those wonderful smells were right there in his house. So he got up and he went into the kitchen and he said, "Wife, how is it that you have sausage to cook and bread to bake?" And she said, "Well, you came home last night with nothing, so I was able to sell the pile of manure by the front door to our farmer friend down the road who is plowing a new field." Well, what could he say? What could he do? He had that wonderful breakfast and he headed off into the woods, determined to do what he was supposed to do. And he found those sticks that he dropped, and he picked them up, and he gathered a few more. And as he was heading towards the village to sell them, he came around a corner in the path, and there was that stranger once again, who kind of chuckled and said, "I still want to help you." And he held out what looked like another sack. So the old man took the sack and he looked inside, and it had gold coins in it too. And he fainted again right there on the path. Well, when he woke up, the stranger was gone, but the sack of coins was still there. And so this time he said, "Okay, I know what I need to do. I'm going to go home. I'm going to tell my wife. We'll decide what we're going to do with this money. And it's just such a blessing." So on he went, and he was thinking about all the things they could do and how well they would be set for life. And again, as he approached the house, he started having those bad thoughts again. Well, she's going to have some ideas that probably aren't going to work, and I'm not sure what to do. So when he got inside, he hid that sack of gold coins underneath the ashes in the fireplace and then went on in. Well, that morning he was having that dream again, and it was just the delicious smells of sausage and freshly baked bread. And he opened his eyes, and again, it came from his house. So he went into the kitchen and he said, "Again, wife, how were you able to get this wonderful food and make this beautiful breakfast for us?" And she said, "Well, again, you came home with nothing. So I was able to sell the ashes in the fireplace to the farm wife down the road who's making soap today." Well, what could he do? What could he say? He had his delicious breakfast and he went off into the woods. He found that load of sticks that he dropped for a second time, picked it up, added more to it through the day, and started to head to the village to sell them when he came around a corner in the path, and there was that stranger once again who just shook his head and laughed, and he said, "Well, this hasn't worked. Let's try something else." And he had a big bag that was moving, that looked like things were moving in it. And he said, "There are 24 frogs in this bag. Take this bag down to the village, find the aisle selling fish, buy the largest fish you can find in trade for this sack of frogs." And he handed the old man the sack of frogs, and the old man walked away from him, thanking him, towards the village. He got to the village and he thought about other things that he could buy and things that he could see. And he said, "No, I'm going to do what I was told this time." So he walked and he walked, and he found the aisle where all the fishmongers were selling their goods. And he found the one with a large fish that he was able to trade for that sack of frogs. And he brought that fish home, and it was too late to really clean the fish and get it ready. So he hung it up outside their house for the night and would deal with it in the morning. Well, the old couple went to bed that night just as a storm was approaching, and they were sleeping soundly through most of the night. And then they were awakened by voices, and it sounded like singing and joyful voices. And they woke up confused, got out of bed, went to the front door and opened the door. And there indeed, in their front yard, were a number of young men dancing and singing and so joyful. And the old folks said, "What's going on?" And one of the young men said, "Oh, we came here to thank you for saving our lives." And the couple said, "What are you talking about?" And the young man said, "Well, we were out at sea. We were lost at sea because that storm came up so quickly. We couldn't figure out where to go. We couldn't see what we could do to avoid those deadly rocks that are outside the village. And we just were afraid we would die out there. And then we saw your light, and we followed your light, and we were saved. And we come here to thank you." And the old couple said, "Light? What light?" And then noticed that there was light around them earlier than the dawn. And the young man said, "Your light, that beam of light that found us out at sea and led us home safely." And the old couple looked up, and that fish was glowing such a great golden light that it could be a beacon out into the sea. And that's what those young men had seen. And so from that day on, the old couple had company, they had the food they needed, and they were able to live the rest of their lives happily in that house on the cliff overlooking the sea. This is my adaptation of Italo Calvino's wonderful story, The Shining Fish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's a great story. Um, what do you think made the difference in the story? What was it that happened differently that allowed he and his wife to get the reward?
Well, for him to finally, on the third try, decide to follow directions. And perhaps it was because it wasn't gold, I don't know, but it was something weird that had to be dealt with, that he agreed to do what he was told and then did follow through on it.
Yeah. It also occurred to me that in that in this final scenario, he is actually interacting with others and giving them something that they need instead of being a hoarder for the first two. But yeah, what a beautiful story. And there's nothing like Calvino to give us a strange twist to a story, a fish that turns into a searchlight, a light. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Sarah. And I want to remind our viewers that we do this twice a day at 2:30 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the evening on East Coast time in the United States. I say that because there's more than one East Coast in the world and people are watching this really everywhere. So if you don't happen to stop by at that precise moment, you can find it on our Facebook page or on the YouTube page, the YouTube playlist, which is posted at the top of our Facebook page. And you can always find all these stories there. So what I want to remind you all to do even more than watching the next story or rewatching some of the old ones is to tell stories to each other, to tell stories to people who you might not think would be interested in something else, but everybody loves a story. And when we start to tell each other stories and we start to invite people into our worlds and see their world through our eyes, that's when really healing can begin. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jim.